I hope everyone's been able to find a seat. It's wonderful to see you all here this early on a Monday. So thank you for making the trip. Welcome to Flinders. You may be returning, you may be just visiting, or you may be starting to study this year. So whatever your situation is, I hope you have a great day here. It's very exciting to see you all. So my name's Claire. I'm from the Student Learning Support Service here at Flinders. And today we're going to talk about essential study skills for uni. So this is something that will be really broadly applicable. So no matter what discipline you're studying in, and no matter what you're planning to kind of get out of university, hopefully you'll all be able to gain some really good insights and skills for today. And I'll go over a little bit about what the Student Learning Support Service does towards the end of our presentation, because we can kind of be with you throughout your study journey. So if you kind of found or you find some of this stuff useful, then it would be really great to see you again as you kind of progress through. So I don't know when that happened. Is that better? Maybe just a thumbs up if that's better. Oh yeah, okay, great. Sorry guys online. Yeah, so we're going to be covering these big four. So thinking, reading, writing and referencing at uni. So depending on where you're coming from, if you're coming straight from school, if you're coming from the workforce, if you're coming back from a long time since you've last studied, these four kind of key things will be really, really good starting points for you to kind of think about how you can move forward. So this first, I guess, idea of thinking at university is made up of what we call critical thinking, right? So you've probably all heard a lot or a little bit about critical thinking, particularly in the last few years with the rise of things like fake news, right? So critical thinking essentially at university is staying conscious of our thinking. So it's really at the heart of university study. So this means staying conscious of your own limitations, your own perspectives, your own biases. And for this reason, it can also be quite challenging, right? Because it can be quite time consuming and quite hard work to think about, the things that inform our everyday beliefs, right? So that can be really challenging. But that is kind of the, I guess, tenet of thinking at university. Part of what we think about when we think about critical thinking at university is this idea of an academic argument, right? So this might be something that you're kind of familiar with if you've just finished school, but this idea of an academic argument is a little bit different than, what we would assume or think about as an everyday argument, right? So when we think about an everyday argument, we're thinking about things like, squabbling with siblings, or parents or your friends maybe, right? And when we talk about an academic argument at uni, we're thinking about something quite different. So academic arguments at university can really help us hone and develop our critical thinking skills. So it can be really, really useful for us to start thinking about academic arguments really early on in our university study, no matter what we're studying, right? So constructing an academic argument requires you to think about really key parts of what you're talking about. It requires you to think about the pros, the cons, the strengths, the weaknesses, all of these things about a particular idea or theory. And it involves critiquing things, unpacking them. So why do we agree or disagree with ideas, things like that. And you also need really good evidence and reasons to support your claims. So we can see with this slide here that an academic argument is essentially made up of this little, I guess, algorithm, right? So we've got a claim. So this is where we make our claim or our conclusion. And then we have the justification, so the supporting premises and the reasoning, the logical connectives that help base this claim in evidence, right? And then these things make up an academic argument. But really importantly, when we have this justification, we want to make sure that we are including strong evidence here, right? So strong evidence, depending on the kind of assessment you're doing or the kind of discipline you're in, that will be different, right? So for example, when we're talking about evidence in history, for example, we might be thinking about books, we might be thinking about primary sources, so, you know, particular historical records. If we're thinking about disciplines in the sciences, so we might be thinking about reports, experiments, things like that. If we're thinking about case studies, we might be thinking of our own personal experiences. So that evidence can be different depending on what discipline you're studying in. So think about it a little bit. If you're kind of wondering how to into, I guess, something that you might be a little bit familiar with, right? We can think about an academic argument like it's a court case, right? So, for example, you're the lawyer that is claiming that your client is innocent. So your claim is that your client couldn't have done the particular crime that you're referring to, and your justification is because they were at a different place at the time that this particular crime occurred, right? So that's your justification. You might then, to support this justification, produce some security footage, right, to support this claim. So you've just then made a claim, a justification, and you've supported that justification with evidence. So that's kind of a really, I guess, simple way. Another thing that might be like kind of a little bit more relevant to us is this idea or this argument that I'm going to kind of bring up a few times throughout this presentation, that higher education should be free for all, right? So that's something that is probably quite compelling to a lot of us, and something that, you know, you might have really strong opinions on, right? So our claim might be there that free higher education encourages a more diverse student cohort, right? Because it's therefore available and there's a higher access to a wide variety of populations that have been traditionally excluded from university. So again, that would be our justification. And then we might find some data on the groups that are the highest represented in university communities, or we might refer to a study or an article on the reasons that particular groups can't access university, right? So that is another example of how we might frame an academic argument in this context. And this is only one way that critical thinking is a really important skill to have at university. There are some other really, really significant things that you get from critical thinking at university, and some things that you'll probably be asked to demonstrate a lot as you move through your study. So these are the capacity to understand and evaluate the work of important researchers, the capacity to critically analyse your literature, and the capacity to reason positively, take this evidence that you've gotten from your literature and reason positively in an academic environment. So it's not just about reading and understanding what you're reading, but it's about being able to analyse and critically think about that reading. We might stop. Does anyone have any questions so far, or anything that isn't clear? We'll kind of do a few of these throughout the session, and then we'll have a big kind of moment for questions at the end. But I'm just conscious also of the people online. Is anyone there? Perfect. Yeah, no pressure, but there are some. Yeah, perfect. Right. Yes, we've got a question over there. Okay, what does it mean to reason positively? That's a really, really good question. So when we're thinking about reasoning positively at university, we mean, in essence, to be able to take what we've read and create a logical conclusion out of it, right? So you might have read 5 or 10 different opinions, different theories, different ideas, but your ability to then take those opinions and ideas, even if they're conflicting, and create something logical out of it and constructive, that is essentially what it means to reason positively. Yeah, no worries. Any other questions so far? Cool. All right. So another element of critical thinking and how we kind of dovetail into our next section about reading the work of others. Sorry, I've got a question. Okay. Yeah, if you've got a question online, if you just want to type it into the chat, just because we've got a few different things muted here. So if you're speaking, we may not be able to hear you. And I'll answer them as they come in. Right, great. Yeah, so when we think about critical thinking, another element to critical thinking and the way that this critical thinking can manifest is in reading the work of others. So this is the first kind of side or way that critical thinking can manifest, right? So it's reading the work of others. So this involves identifying and analysing arguments. We talked about this a little bit already. Evaluating logic, evaluating evidence, and assessing knowledge claims to see how strong or weak or convincing they are. So being able to really be conscious of what you're reading. So think about, for example, if you read an opinion piece or a blog post, right? Maybe you have someone that you really enjoy their writing and you kind of follow them and wait to hear their takes on whatever's happening, right? These are often written really persuasively and they may succeed in kind of riling you up or persuading you, but there may not always be a lot of evidence to their ideas. They're just written really persuasively and really in a really compelling way. So critical thinking is the ability to stop and question what we're reading and thinking about, is the author producing enough evidence to really support what they're saying here? And then the second way that this critical thinking can manifest is in creating our own work, right? And this is something that will be really useful to you as you work through your assessments and you think about what your lecturers are looking for here. So it's about making your own claims. And when you are making your own claims, presenting really strong arguments. So you can kind of demonstrate critical thinking in making strong arguments through acknowledging debates, right? So bringing in some of those opposing arguments that are made against your point. And also through the reading you've done, being able to articulate why those opposing ideas are not as strong as yours, right? So being able to acknowledge those particular problems that people might have with the argument or the theory that you're putting forward, and then also being able to critique that problem. Acknowledging limitations, so not only through reading, but our own limitations. What are our limitations? What do we bring to this particular argument that is preventing us from potentially kind of producing a well-rounded work? And also contributing to knowledge. So how are you contributing to the established knowledge, to the established canon of academia? Right. Any questions online? No? Cool. All right. Any questions in the room so far? Perfect. All right. So now we move on to reading at university. So there is a lot to read at university. For every topic that you have, you're going to probably be doing, most topics, at least 1 or 2 readings a week, right? So there's a lot to do, a lot to get through. And so because of this, at the SLSS, Student Learning Support Service, we hear a lot of challenges with this, right? So things like, I read slowly, or I like to read for pleasure, I like to read fiction, or I like to read non-fiction, but when I read academic articles, when I read books, I'm so bored, essentially, right? It's really dense. I get to the end I need to start again, I haven't taken anything in, I need to read everything 5 times. And these are all really, really common problems that everyone, I think, at some point struggles with, particularly as it gets to, the middle of the year and you've got a lot to do. And you also have to find time to fit in these readings. And the reason that we kind of struggle a lot with reading at university is because even if we enjoy reading as a pastime, it's quite a passive process, right? We're reading on our own time, at our own pace, and we're just kind of taking in information. We don't really have to do anything with that information. But at university, it's really, really important to engage in what we call active reading, right? And there are a couple of ways that you can kind of begin to read actively. So you have to have a purpose to the reading that you are doing. So find out the purpose of your reading. Is it, and what do you need to get out of it? Do you need to answer a particular question? Do you need to do a particular set of, do you need a particular research outcome for this writing? Do you need to understand the broad or the specifics of a debate? Think about the purpose, and then think about how you can kind of extrapolate that purpose. So think about questions that you might ask yourself or that you will be asked after you've done this reading. If you have a few different readings for that particular week, think about what your tutorial or what your broad idea is for your class and read with that particular idea or question in mind. So really focusing reading on what you need to get out of that reading is a really, really significant skill to have. And think about what you already know. So think about what you've already heard in your lectures. Think about what you may have already researched for a different topic or what you may have learned in school or in the workplace or in life. And think about how you can add to that, expand to that, but also use that to fill in any gaps that you might have. And then if you achieve a particular milestone in your reading, reward yourself, right? So whether that's through movie or a TV show or wine or playing a game that you've been waiting to play, all those different things can kind of help make it a little bit less painful as you're going through this reading process. And so if you're wondering kind of how you can begin to read actively, we can think about this idea or this strategy of the 5-point reading plan. So some of you may have heard about this already. It might be something that you are familiar with, but essentially this is really, really useful if, for example, you've ended up with a big stack of readings for a particular assessment, right? You need to figure out which ones are relevant and which ones you're going to read closely, which ones you can kind of just skim or set to the side for another time altogether. And so the purpose of the 5-point reading plan is so that you don't have to essentially, read things that might not be relevant to you or read things that you can save for another day. And you might be thinking also, okay, this is a lot of, the 5-point reading plan is a lot of work for every single reading that I have to do. The purpose of the 5-point reading plan is essentially that you don't have to do it for every reading. If you can start to figure out which particular readings are relevant, read them in depth, then you can also figure out other readings that may not be particularly relevant and that you may not have to read in depth. So once you begin to kind of, work with this plan a little bit more closely, you'll see that you don't really have to do it for every single one, right? So the first we've got, So the first step in this 5-point reading plan is to predict. So this involves looking at things like the title, the abstract, anything like that, and remembering your purpose for reading. So whether it's an assessment, whether it's a tutorial reading, predict whether this book or reading will be relevant. So that's the first step, looking at the really surface level information that you have, right? Then once you've done that, if it is relevant, go through to skimming. So skimming is essentially skimming for keywords, whether you're seeing discussion or debate that you're specifically looking for in relation to your topic. So really quickly skimming through all of the reading and seeing if you can see maybe a phrase that your lecturers use that you think might be relevant, or an idea that you know is related to your arguments, things like that. Then once you've had a skim and you feel that what you're looking through is relevant to you, you can then scan, and this involves reading the introduction and the conclusion of your piece of reading, right? Look for subheadings. So once you've read the introduction and the conclusion, look for subheadings. Figure out if those subheadings are relevant. If they are, then read the first sentence of every paragraph, so the topic sentence of every paragraph. See what this can tell you about what that particular paragraph might have for you, right? If then the scan has been really productive and you've found that these introductions, conclusions, topic sentences are relevant to you, then this is where we can spend more time on it. So this is where we can analyze it more closely. Maybe we want to read most of it, right? Maybe we want to read the whole thing. But once we've done these 3 steps and they are relevant, it's time to think, okay, this might be something that I can devote a little bit of time to, right? And so then we can note. So noting down things like key ideas, key arguments, key theorists, and why they're relevant. Is it relevant to a particular question? Is it relevant to a particular part of your assignment? And this is really important because it's important to remember what you've read, right? If you've gone through every single one of these processes and then you get to analysing and you don't take down notes of some sort, you won't remember them very well. And you also won't have your referencing materials to hand, which we'll talk about in a little while. So the noting is really, really important. So you can see that if you are doing the 5-point reading plan, the nature of the 5-point reading plan means you're not doing it for every single reading. Because if you get to predicting or skimming and this particular reading is not relevant to you, then you can stop, right? Then you think, okay, I've had a look at this. I've gotten to step 2 of the reading plan and it's not relevant, so I'm going to stop now. So it's really useful in that sense because it gives you a little bit of a clear direction, but it also ensures that you are not missing anything really important. And so if you're wondering about questions that you might want to ask yourself as you are reading, these are some really useful questions. I won't read them all out, but just to kind of get you thinking about things that you might want to think about as you read. So think about what's the aim of the author, what message is the author trying to send? Think about, which philosophies or ideas or theories really influence the author. Think about the main arguments and if the main arguments are supported by evidence. And if they are, is this evidence reliable? So this might require a little bit of research as well if you're not sure. Did the author influence your opinion? Were you convinced by their arguments and why not? So again, staying conscious of your own thinking as you read. And then how can you use the information from the text for your assignment? So actually then applying it to what you are, what the purpose for your reading is, can be really useful as well. So that is reading for university. Does anybody have any questions either in the room or online? Any questions online? No? Oh. Yes, so that's for anyone in the room that's interested in that too. If you are interested in watching this recording later, at a later date, maybe you want to take some extra notes, it will be available on the, is it the orientation little Octa button thing? Yep. Okay, great. Yep. That's right, yep. You know the one, you should be familiar with it by now. Yes, we'll also have a version of this on our flow page and our Canvas site. So if you can't, for whatever reason, find the orientation little button, then we'll have an older version of this, but it's the same kind of information. Yeah. We've got some questions in the room. Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. On the orientation page. On the orientation page. Okay, so ours on our Flow and Canvas sites are available all the time. Yeah, the orientation page I'm not sure about. Yeah. Yeah. I know for ours, so the question was, are they available for all of the kind of lectures? Recordings are available. For ours, so for the understanding grades, for balancing uni and life, and for this one, they will all be available on Flow and Canvas. The other ones, I'm not sure. I think it depends on, I mean, they'll all be available, I think, on the orientation thing. But as for if they house them in their own separate things, I'm not sure. It would depend on the, on the, I guess, area. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Mm. Yeah, that's a really good question. So for those who didn't hear, we were talking about, the question was about how do we determine whether something that we've read is relevant if our lecturers haven't specified this is going to be in the exam, or this will be relevant to you at a later date or anything like that, right? And that's a really good question. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a lottery. So you have to kind of trust your gut a little bit and think, okay, is this going to be relevant? However, if you're, really, really in the dark and you're feeling like, I have no idea how to kind of determine this, a really good way to start thinking about it is think about what you recognise from your topic. So has the lecturer brought up a particular word, or has something stuck out to you in your notes? And when you read that in your readings, even if they haven't said this is really important for the exam, maybe give it a little bit more of a deeper read, right? So being able to sort of connect those dots is essentially a really big part of the battle, I suppose. The other thing that I would kind of, I guess, recommend is your lecturers and your topic coordinators will usually give you readings every week. For most disciplines, this is kind of the case. If you're stuck and you're thinking, I'm not sure, maybe you're feeling like you're missing key points or you're not sure what's relevant, try and find the other work done by the authors of the readings that they're given you, because often the readings that they give you are by people that they think have something interesting to say, or that they really respect, or that they think have really interesting ideas. So if you then go and sort of do a bit of a cross search and find out if that particular author has written anything else that might be relevant, that can also be a really good way to start. So unfortunately, there's no, I guess, really cut and dry answer, but I think you'll start to get a really good idea as you move through about the sorts of, I guess, ideas and theories and things that will be relevant to you through their kind of connection to what you've already been learning. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, we might keep moving, and then at the end, we can talk a little bit more if anyone else has any questions. So, writing at university. So, this is a big one. Academic writing is essentially output for your lecturers and your tutors, right? So you're reading things, you're thinking about things, and the output of that, the manifestation of that, is your writing, whether that's an essay, whether that's a report, whether that's a case study, whether it's a creative piece, doesn't matter, right? So academic writing allows you to demonstrate your sound critical thinking skills and your strong academic reading skills. So again, it's the manifestation of what you've already been doing up until that point. So academic arguments are really, really key to academic writing. Most often you will be presenting an argument in your written work, whether you're kind of conscious of it or not. Even when you're writing something that isn't really obviously argumentative, so for example, a reflection, you're still thinking about perspectives, right? You're still thinking about biases. You're still thinking about evidence, okay? All of these things, regardless of the kind of writing you're doing, are really, really important. And the other thing to be aware of, as I've said, is that there are many forms and genres of academic writing, but the process of tackling a written assignment remains reasonably consistent, right? So again, you could be writing essays, reports, literature reviews, anything like that, but there is kind of, I guess, a sense of a universal style for academic writing. And again, if we look at our 5-point process, I've got another one for writing, we can kind of break it down to these 5 pillars, right? So analysing, scoping and brainstorming, this involves, materials to use for writing, planning, writing, and then editing and proofreading. So we'll go through each one of these in a little bit more detail. So we can start off with analysing. So often when students get an essay question, and when we chat to students about essay questions and problems that they're presented with, they might only see the really broad parameters of the essay question, and they might not identify the smaller, more specific, more nuanced things that they are being asked to do. So what they end up with is essentially, still could be a really interesting essay, but it hasn't really done what they have been asked to do. It hasn't answered the question that they have been asked, right? So that's the really important first step, is ensuring that you're responding to the task that you have been set. And we do this by analysing. So analysing in this context means to break something down to its component parts and to see how it works as a whole. And so we can do this by analysing the task itself. So this is usually an essay question, but it can be, a problem or a task or an idea to think about. The kind of general fundamentals are still the same. So up here, I've got an essay question, again, using my higher education should be free for all example, right? So up here we can see higher education should be free for all, discuss. So when we're looking at any kind of essay question, right, we can think of 3 particular, groups. The first is the content words, looking out for the content words. So these relate to the topic. They are the main discussion points. They're essentially what you're going to be talking about. So in this context, our content words would probably be higher education and free, right? These are our kind of big subjects or topics or ideas. Then we can think about instructional words. So these tell us how to do the assignment. These tell us how we should approach the assignment. So in this context, that would be discuss. So that tells us about the kind of thing that we need to produce. Then we have limiting words. So these words narrow the scope. They make our parameters more specific, because otherwise, if, for example, we just had higher education should be free for all, we don't know whether that's talking about Australia specifically. We don't know if that's talking about internationally. We don't know if that's talking about people of a certain, government or time period, right? We don't know. So to make this a little bit more specific, we might see something like higher education in Australia should be free for all. So that would be an example of a limiting word there. So looking out for things like those limiting words. So geographical limitations, temporal limitations, so particular time periods, age limitations, are we talking about particular people, things like that. So all of those different things can be examples of limiting words there. So once we have done our analysing of the task, we can go into scoping and brainstorming. So this is essentially the research process. So this is where you find some evidence to support your reading. And here you can use the kind of broad to medium to complex approach. So you can start looking at general scoping searches. So really, really broad ideas just to get kind of the feel of the general environment of the study area, right? Here, using Google, is okay to start with, right? You can use Google, you can kind of, if you're just trying to get a particular, an idea of a particular area, you might use Wikipedia. That's okay at this really, really early stage, right? Because it gives you broad knowledge. However, we don't want to cite this, right? As it can be really, it's not verifiable. So we'll talk a little bit more about referencing in a little bit. And then we can look at the resources or the readings that you have been given. So the reading list, as I said, is going to give you a really precise list of materials, of research that is quite high quality, is better quality. The problem here is that everyone in the class has access to those resources, right? So they're really good as a starting point, but again, that's not where you want to stop. You need to find more than that to make sure that you have enough detail, that you have some nuance to your argument, and that you're not just going to write the same thing as everyone else is, right? If you're unsure about how to find this information, have a chat to your tutor. Some disciplines have particular databases that they prefer. Some tutors might be happy to give you, some authors that they'd like you to read. Often, tutors and lecturers are very passionate about their areas. So if someone says, I'm wondering what to read or where can I find a really good list of authors, they'll often be very happy to oblige if they're not too flat out. So this kind of helps you, I guess, get a feel for the broader topic and the conversations around it. And then you can start to move into that more complex stage where you're finding your own readings, you're doing a little bit of that, 5-point reading plan for some other articles that you might have found, and really starting to, I guess, focus in on your research. And then we get to planning. So planning is the most important part of this process. So this is number 3. A good planning stage focuses your research and your reading, and it focuses your writing. So it's a really good way to, again, make these things more specific. It also makes sure, if you do the planning stage well, that you don't deviate from your topic and your rubric. So when you're planning, you might be referring to your rubric and your questions and things like that a fair bit. And there are lots of different ways to plan. So I'm sure you all have different ways that you like to approach planning, whether that's through mind maps, whether that's through kind of linear essay plans, whether that's through free writing. Some people really like that. Think about, what's going to help you focus and plan most specifically. And then think about the structure. So which idea goes in which paragraph, and thinking about the fact that generally your introduction and your conclusion will each be around 10% of your overall word count, right? So if you're doing an 1,000 word essay, you're going to be thinking that your introduction and your conclusion will probably be 100 words each, right? So factoring in that and then figuring out, okay, how many paragraphs do I have room for there to, really, I guess, properly flesh out the argument that I'm trying to communicate here, and plan around these words. So that can be a really, really useful way to begin to plan out this stage. And this is also a really good stage to use to introduce references that you have found. So if you've been doing your research and you've found something that's going to be really useful, you can start to insert these into your structured plan, right? So then when you get to the actual writing, it's really easy to see how you can integrate that evidence. And then get to writing, which, if you've done all of these former points, is the easy part. And it might not kind of feel like it as you're going through all of these extra points, but if you've done all of these things, writing really does become the really easy part of this whole process. So if you've planned well, it's going to be really straightforward, hopefully. So things to think about for writing is to use formal but simple language. So your goal should be really easy to understand, and your goal for you as you are writing is to be understood by your lecturers or your tutors. So this means, and a good rule of thumb is to let the material be complex, but not your writing. So often we see You know, one of the most common things that we get in the Student Learning Support Service is students that come in saying, I don't understand why my lecturer, you know, doesn't understand what I'm writing. I'm using words, you know, very complex words that I'm reading in my, you know, articles and books. And they think it's, you know, too much. And I guess the idea is that you want the material to be able to speak for itself. You want the ideas to be complex. You do not have to be in your writing. As long as it's formal, as long as it's academic, that is all you really need. Because remember, your lecturer and your tutor are probably going to be marking 30 or 40 or 50 of these, right? They will probably appreciate a very direct, straightforward style of formal academic writing. So you can use your language to help demonstrate your logic and your argument. So using things like discourse markers. So these are words like however or therefore as a result. So they mark or indicate that you are introducing some evidence, right? Reporting verbs. So Smith claims, Mulvey establishes. So again, reporting the evidence that you have found. And then another question that we get a lot of is whether or not the use of I is appropriate, so personal pronouns. And this really varies depending on discipline and depending on assessment type. So for example, reflective writing, if you're writing a reflection for a placement or a case study or something like that, usually the use of I is okay. But for most academic writing, the use of I needs to be avoided. If you're not sure, it's very, very appropriate and fine to ask your topic coordinator or your lecturer or your tutor, depending on who you're seeing the most of. Generally, we would advise that the use of I should generally be avoided for academic writing. And then we get to editing and proofreading. So there is a difference between editing and proofreading, right? So editing is at the macro level. So it's this big stuff. So it's looking at content for its accuracy and its clarity. So what you're writing about and whether this content is clear and is accurate. And then proofreading is the micro level. So this is the mechanics, this is, you know, spelling, grammar, things like that. And this is where a lot of students can unfortunately lose marks because you're so happy to have it done, and we've all been there, you're so happy to get it done. You just think, all right, I am going to submit this right now. I'm not going to look at it again and, you know, whatever. But it can be really frustrating getting your essay back and seeing that you've lost marks for really, really easy things, easy fixes that if you had just gone through and had another read of, that you would have been able to fix. So this is just as an important part as kind of the other steps, right? So that's writing. Any questions online or in the room so far? We're almost at the end. We can have no questions online. Awesome. Any in the room? Perfect. I know this is a lot of information, so it's all good. So, okay, so the question was, is proofreading is using an application acceptable or not? I assume they're talking about things like Grammarly. Grammarly is okay. We'll talk a little bit. So we have a service at Flinders that we are partnered with called Studiosity. I'll talk a little bit about Studiosity in, you know, one slide, but essentially Studiosity is our own type of, I guess, Grammarly. You get 10 interactions with Studiosity per half a year, and essentially you can send in about up to 1,500 words of your writing, and it will be looked over and you will be given feedback by an expert in language and academic writing, right? And that's kind of a person, I guess, behind the feedback there. So we do have our own, I guess, methods and platforms for feedback. Grammarly is okay, but just be wary of the kinds of sites that you are using, because you want to make sure that they're not changing anything fundamental about your writing, because then that becomes an academic integrity issue, which we'll talk about a little bit now. But yeah, so the answer is yes, but within reason, I suppose. Excellent. Any other questions? Perfect. All right, so just quickly, referencing at university. So this comes in under, I guess, academic integrity. And integrity is one of our university's 4 core values, and I've got them there. So academic integrity has to do with principles of honesty, respect, trust, fairness, and academic integrity, essentially behaving and acting with academic integrity, shows that you know how to do your work in the right way. So it's a really, really, really important part of your assessment journey, I suppose. So why do we reference? So when we're talking about academic integrity, the main ways that we do this is through referencing and through paraphrasing and quoting, and referencing those paraphrasing and quoting, I guess, areas appropriately. So we do this to acknowledge the work of others and to give them credit, to enable someone to access the same resources. So if your lecturer or your tutor is marking and they want to have a look at what you've been reading, that's really important. To show you have conducted thorough and balanced research, and of course to meet the requirements of academic integrity. So it's an essential part of any kind of research that you keep a record of what you've been reading, what parts of that you've been reading, and being able to then reference that appropriately. So when do we need to reference? We need to reference any time we are using an idea which is not originally our own. So many students misunderstand the kind of, I guess, the broad idea of referencing, and they believe that they only need to reference when they're using the exact words from the original, or when they're quoting, right? And while you do need to do this, it's much more broad than that. So this can look like paraphrasing or summarizing. So using someone else's idea, but in your own words, that's fine, but you need to reference. And also when you're quoting directly. So a good rule of thumb for this is that we reference ideas, right? Rather than writing, rather than a particular, I guess, phrase, we're referencing the idea in that writing. So to do this, there are lots and lots of different referencing styles that are in use across the university. Depending on your discipline, again, will be kind of the one that you need to use. One of the most common is APA 7. Some disciplines have really, really strict parameters over which referencing style to use, and ensuring that you do it well. Some other disciplines, like humanities, for example, don't really care as long as you do it consistently, right? So make sure that regardless, you check with your topic coordinator if there's any doubt as to the kind of reference that you need to use, because this is really, really kind of important, I suppose. And ways you can kind of make sure that you're referencing correctly is to look at our referencing study guides. So we have really, really useful study guides for referencing for a number of different styles. These have kind of, I guess, templates for different, resources that you need to reference. So I would highly recommend having a look through these and kind of bookmarking them to your computer as you go through. Just a quick note on other skills at university, things like maths, for example. You might need to use maths during your time at university, even in unexpected topics. So we get a lot of questions about when do I need to use maths? Drug calculations and nursing, psychology, you need to use statistics, things like that. We at the SLSS have lots and lots of resources. If you're kind of thinking, oh my God, I didn't think I'd have to do maths, or I'm not confident with maths, where do I start? We have lots of resources. So we have our study guides, which I'll show you a link to in one of the next slides. And we also have a series of resources on maths. So these can be found either on the SLSS Flow page or Canvas site, depending on which one you use more. And these can be really, really useful and cover a whole range of different skills. So if you're needing, some extra support, that can be really useful. On that, finding support. So I know that this was a lot of information to kind of, I guess, take in a really short period of time. However, we are always here. So if you're kind of thinking, you know, if you came in really confident and now you're thinking, oh my God, where do I go from here? There are lots of different things you can do. So there are the study guides. So you can find them at this link here. So if you want to take a photo or type that in right now on your device, that's all good. These cover a really, really broad range of skills. So I really highly recommend checking them out. You can also see our Flow or Canvas sites, as I've said. So you should be automatically enrolled in the Flow one and the Canvas one, I think. I don't know if we've got that fixed yet, but you should be automatically enrolled in the Canvas one as well. Or you might need to click enroll, yeah. Okay, yeah, so Mel will put the link in the chat. We also have the Learning Lounge. So this is something that we really recommend you make use of. This is essentially drop-in guided independent study. So what that means, right, is that it's a public library, you know, like a general library area called the Commons. It's on level 2 of the Central Library. From Monday to Friday, between 11 and 2:30, we have learning advisors there. And if you would like some help with understanding your feedback, with you know, structuring your reference list, for example, if you've got a question about your essay or your assignment, they are there to help. That's their whole job. So please go and make use of them. You're also welcome to just sit down and study and, you know, ask them a question if you need to. But that's a really, really useful service and support for anyone that wants to use it. So we really highly recommend using that. And Studiosity. So this is available in each of your topics. It's embedded into each of your topic flow sites or Canvas sites. So you should be able to access it through your topic flow or Canvas site. Again, you get 10 interactions per half year. So interactions can be submitting up to 1,500 words, or you can live chat with an advisor about a particular kind of study challenge or problem that you're having. So I would recommend, if you've got a little question, trying to bundle it in with kind of maybe a broader chat, so you're able to make the most of those 10 interactions per half year. And we've also got an assignment calculator on Studiosity, which can be really useful if you're wondering how to start planning for your assignments. So really all I've got. We've got a question online. Yep. Yep. Okay, that's a really good question. So some examples of avoiding I and using different language in place of this. So for example, if you were saying something like, as I have established, you could say as previously established, right? So using the passive voice as opposed to the active voice. We have guides on that as well. So that would be an example, I suppose. Any other questions? Yeah. Sorry? Yes, so we will put that on our Flow and Canvas sites. Yep, so you'll be able to access that. That's fine to download those slides. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So to use the referencing generator, yeah, so you can use one. However, I would recommend manually making sure that they're all correct, because, for example, if you kind of accidentally input a particular, you know, author that's not correct, it might spit out something that's incorrect. So you can use the referencing generator, but just make sure that it's correct when you use it. Any other questions?